Okay. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Nusret and I'm a second year PhD student at Stanford. And I work with Professor David Chia on consensus and blockchains. So this is actually the first work I have done here in Stanford with my advisor, and I'm very happy to talk about it here today. So the name of the paper I will be presenting is Everything is a Race and Nakamoto Always Wins. And as we go along with the presentation, we'll see what it means. And this is a joint work with Amir Dembos, Shriram Kanan, David Che, Pramod Viswanath, Shoy Chawang, and Ofar Zaytouni. So I would like to first start by listing out some of the main results from the paper. So the first main result is that Nakamoto's private double spend attack, as we found out, is actually the worst attack in terms of resilience to adversary fraction. So we have found that the protocol behind Bitcoin, the proof of work longest chain protocol, is secure if and only if the private attack fails with high probability. So another way to express this is that the maximum tolerable fraction for the adversary control over the total compute power is determined by the private attack threshold, the threshold beyond which the private attack succeeds. And this is not only true for proof of work protocols, but we have found that this is true for 3 different classes of protocols. And in these other classes of protocols, the fraction is over the resource that is relevant to the protocol. For instance, we have shown that it is true for the proof of work protocol and certain kinds of proof of stake protocols, where now we don't talk about the fraction of adversary power, but rather the fraction of coins that the adversary hold. And similarly for proof of space protocols, where the fraction is now over the total number of space. And before actually presenting the results, I would like to give a brief overview of the longest chain protocols, starting with Nakamoto. So Nakamoto's longest chain protocol is a devilishly simple protocol. So the protocol, there is a set of nodes that are distributed around the globe, and each of these nodes are mining blocks. So the protocol tells these nodes to mine their blocks on the tip of the longest chain that they see. And let's suppose all of these nodes see the same longest chain that is shown on the left. And they simply mine blocks on the tip of the longest chain, and they put transactions within these blocks. So some of these nodes might be controlled by an adversary, which we denote as a Byzantine adversary, which basically means the adversary can deviate from the protocol arbitrarily. So for instance, this Byzantine adversary can mine a block that is not on the tip of the longest chain. And how do we confirm transactions in this protocol? A transaction is confirmed if it is k deep, or in this case, let's say k equals 3 deep within the longest chain. So now, because all of these nodes see the same longest chain shown on the left, each of these nodes would confirm the transaction, tx, that is 3 deep. So this very simple protocol actually leads to a bunch of attacks. And so far I have mentioned the private attack, and I actually claim that it's the worst attack in terms of the adversary fraction. So to give some context, I will also briefly mention how private attack works. But before that, we need to identify what we are attacking. And what we are attacking are certain properties of this protocol that makes it secure. So the first property is safety. So safety in the context of longest chain protocols can be translated very simply as follows. Once a transaction is confirmed, once it's k deep within the longest chain, it should stay as part of the longest chain. It should not be removed from the longest chain, or rather the longest chain should not change once the transaction is k deep, such that it doesn't include the transaction anymore. And the second property is liveness, which says that the longest chain contains blocks that are mined by honest miners. And these two together imply the security of the protocol, and the private attack is going to be an attack on both of these properties. So in the private attack, what ends up happening is that the adversary mines a parallel chain that it keeps in private from the honest nodes. So while the honest nodes are mining the chain that is shown on the top by these white blocks, the adversary is mining this private chain that is shown by the black blocks at the bottom. So as you can see now in this k equals 3 deep rule, this transaction shown on the top is confirmed. So now every honest node is happy to basically do whatever economic transactions they would be doing as specified by this TX. However, once this transaction is confirmed, what happens is that adversary releases the 4 blocks that is shown on the bottom. So now the longest chain has changed, and this transaction is no longer a part of the longest chain. So we have lost safety. And similarly, the longest chain now does not contain any honest blocks. So we have also lost liveness in some sense. So to actually quantify how often these private attacks happen, or like what is the probability of success, let's suppose the adversary grows its parallel chain with rate lambda A that is proportional to the fraction of the compute power it holds. And similarly, the honest nodes grow this chain shown on the top with rate lambda H. So as a very simple statistical result tells us that the private attack fails with high probability, and this failure probability increases and approaches 1 as we increase this number k, in the k-deep confirmation rule. It fails with high probability if lambda is smaller than lambda h. However, so far we have been assuming that whenever an honest block is mined, every honest node also sees that block immediately, so they can mine on top of it, which is actually not so true in the real world because there is a communication delay delta. And when there is communication delay, there can be forking. Some honest nodes might not see this last white block, so they will still be mining on the previous block. And some honest work will be lost in this sense. And when we consider this forking, in the worst case, where every node, every honest node is, we can think of as an infinitesimal point, the growth rate of this honest chain at the top is decreasing, and it's lower bounded by this lambda h over 1 plus lambda h delta quantity. Now, in this case, when we consider forking, we can say the private attack fails if lambda a is smaller than this new quantity. And similarly, we can say the private attack succeeds otherwise. So this basically forbids us from operating in certain regions of lambda a and lambda h. Now, a very valid question is what happens when the private attack fails? Can there be other attacks that might be succeeding in the region, or is actually the protocol secure whenever the private attack fails? So that was one of the motivating questions behind our work. And to formally answer this question, I would like to first introduce the network model we considered. So we considered a synchronous network with a delay upper bound capital delta. And we assume the total mining rate, or in other types of protocols, the total production rate of blocks that is given by lambda. And we considered a Byzantine adversary, as mentioned, that controls a beta fraction of the resource. So its total block production rate or mining rate is beta times lambda equals lambda A. And similarly, the rest of the mining or production comes from honest blocks with rate lambda H. And we modeled the block production process via a Poisson arrival process of rate lambda. And this holds in the size when the size of the time slots approach 0. If we think of a slotted system where every node wins the right to produce a block at each slot with some probability p, if you just like make this slot smaller and smaller and change p accordingly, then this process model basically becomes a Poisson process. So we have been operating in the continuous time in our work. Okay, so now what do we mean by closing the gap? So far we have seen private attack making a certain region of lambda A and lambda H forbidden for us to operate. And now I would like to rephrase this question as follows. Given some adversary control fraction beta and a network delay delta, for what values of lambda the block production rate, or rather 1 over lambda, which is like a block time, that is the time you would wait between each block, basically, each incremental block. For what values of this is Nakamoto's proof of work longest chain protocol secure? So why did we ask the question in this way, rather than just asking about the values of lambda and lambda h? The reason is as follows. Ideally, for a given beta and delta, I would like to operate on the maximum possible lambda that would give me a secure protocol, because larger lambda or smaller block time means a faster growing chain or smaller latency. And as we all know, latency is generally a big issue for many longest chain protocols. Okay, so now I would like to show this graph where on the y-axis we list the adversary fraction, on the x-axis we list this block time scaled by network delay. So we can basically parameterize the protocol. Instead of by lambda a and lambda h, we can parameterize it by beta and lambda times delta. And as we go towards the left, we have a faster chain, larger lambda. So the first result that actually came from Nakamoto's paper is that the private attack succeeds in this gray region. So as you can see, contrary to like some popular belief, it's not always 50%. So the adversary need not control up to 50% when lambda h times delta is very large, and that is because of forking. Because of forking, a lot of honest work will be lost towards the left-hand side of the graph, and adversary need not control up to 50%. But what about this white region at the bottom? So far we have not said anything. And actually the groundbreaking work in this white region came in 2015 from Guy, Kiayas, and Leonardos. In their groundbreaking Bitcoin backbone paper, they showed that there are certain regions within this white space where no attack succeeds. And not just private attack fails, but every kind of attack you can think of fails in attacking the security properties we have seen. And another groundbreaking aspect of that paper was, if you give me a beta that you want to operate on, I can always find you a lambda, maybe not the best lambda, maybe the lambda, or 1 over the lambda, the block time I find is a bit large, or lambda is a bit small, too small, but still I can find you 1 lambda for that level of beta. And now we want to make this result tighter. I want to find the largest lambda or the smallest block time that I can still be secure given a beta fraction of adversary. And so this white region, parts of it were filled by some other works, like this one by Pass, Seaman, and Shelab, and Lindgren. But there was still some gap in that region. And our result basically fills in this gap and tells us that if you give me a beta, I only need to find a value of lambda such that the private attack fails. And in this case, actually there exists a proof that will show the protocol to be secure with high probability. By that I mean secure as long as you select your K in the KD rule large enough. So it is summarized here. Okay, so far I have been talking about the proof of work longest chain protocol, but I have also mentioned other types, but I haven't given the reason why we classified them as different types. So now I would like to shed some light on this. So for the honest behavior, these protocols are actually the same. Like there is a block production process, like there is a rule for producing a block. Maybe your hash of your nonce is smaller than a threshold, or the PRF of your coin is smaller than some threshold, etc. But in all cases, when an honest node gains the right to produce a block, it always puts it to the tip of the longest chain that is seen by the honest node. However, these protocols dramatically differ in terms of the power they give the adversary when they produce a block. So the first example I showed is a Bitcoin proof of work. In this case, there's a block production process of rate lambda A, and whenever the adversary mines a block, we can think of the adversary as attaching this block to an existing block in the block tree, or rather the adversary is mining a block on the tip of an existing block in the block tree. Whereas in these proof-of-stake type protocols, if we have the same randomness across the blocks in the block tree, whenever the adversary produces a block, it can attach multiple copies of it to every existing block. So this is what we call a weak version of nothing at stake attack. And now we will see a much stronger version of the nothing at stake attack, which happens in the proof-of-space Chia protocol. So in this protocol, there is a different randomness at each block, which means that there is an independent adversarial block production process at each block. So it's as if the adversary can produce blocks with rate lambda A on top of each of these existing blocks. And these processes are independent, and whenever a new block is produced, it spawns its own production process on top of it. So this actually leads to a blow up of the number of adversary blocks if the adversary wants to exploit this. However, as we will soon see, this does not completely destroy the security because the blow up happens in the number of blocks, but not necessarily in the speed with which the adversary would be catching up with the honest chain. Okay, so far we have seen that where we close the gap in a proof of work protocol. So now let's see a similar result for the proof of space type protocols. So in these protocols, a striking similarity is that the threshold for the private attack to succeed in this idealized continuous time model is the same as the proof of work protocols. So in fact, the fact that the adversary can attach multiple copies of a block does not help it that much. And again, the security of these protocols were shown by some of these past works. And again, we close the gap by showing that the protocol is secure whenever the private attack fails with high probability. Now, in the Chia proof-of-space protocol, something interesting happens. The private attack threshold is much lower for the adversary than the proof-of-work or the proof-of-stake protocols. And that is exactly because of the independent mining issue that I just mentioned in the previous slide. Because of the fact that the adversary can mine blocks independently on each existing block, in its private attack, actually, the growth rate of it as private chain, or rather now its private tree, is scaled by a factor of E that we show in front of the lambda A. And actually, we were the first people to show that the protocol is secure whenever the private attack fails on the proof-of-space protocols. Please interrupt and ask any question as they arise. I'll be very happy to answer them. And for people who actually like theorems or like more formal statements, here's a formal statement for our results on the proof of work and proof of stake protocols. We show that as long as lambda A is smaller than this quantity on the right, which is as lambda H scaled down due to forking, we guarantee security, safety, and liveness parameterized by security parameter sigma with high probability, or except with probability that decays in a negligible fashion in the security parameter. And almost the same result follows for the Chia proof-of-space protocols. The only difference is now the lambda A doesn't have to be as large as lambda H, or it can be only need to be as large as lambda H over 1 over E. And as I mentioned, that is due to independent arrival processes at each block. Okay, so far I have been talking about the results, but I think the most interesting and fun part of the paper is the method itself and how we actually obtain these results via the method. So the method consists of basically two main parts. And the first main part is the step of block tree partitioning. And what do we mean by block tree partitioning? So in developing this method, we were inspired by the private attack. As you can see in the private attack, there is a very clear distinction between an adversarial tree or chain that is trying to overtake an honest tree or chain. And however, in a general type of attack, that is not true. Adversary blocks and honest blocks can be just mashed together in the form that I like to call a block mess. And now it's really hard to make sense of this block mess. Unlike a private attack, there is no clear distinction between an adversary tree and an honest chain that are racing with each other. So to actually give some structure to this block mess, we can arrange adversary blocks that have the same honest blocks in its prefix, the same first honest block in its prefix, into an adversary tree. So what happened here, I'm just going to show it again. Some of the adversary blocks that share an honest root are grouped in the same color as an adversary tree. And once we group these adversary blocks into these adversary trees with the same first honest block in their prefix, we can now arrange these honest blocks into a chain structure. Just like place them in a chain structure and move these adversary trees accordingly into the levels that they would fit in this chain structure. And now once we have this chain, which we call a fictitious honest chain, and once we have these adversary trees, we can now analyze every kind of attack that can be done on these block trees as a type of a race between an adversary tree or the adversary trees and a fictitious honest chain. And that gives the first part of our title. Everything is a race, because every attack can be represented as a race between a fictitious honest chain and adversary trees. Okay, for simplicity, let's show these adversary trees like a tree, like these triangles. And now I'm starting a simulation where we see a fictitious honest chain grow, and there are new adversary blocks that are mined. So these blue adversary blocks were mined on top of the honest block H4, and some new adversary blocks got attached to the red adversary tree. So our analysis showed that in the presence of forking, when there's a delta network delay, the fictitious honest chain grows at rate at least lambda h over 1 plus lambda h delta. And we model the growth rate of the adversary trees by this parameter lambda ag, which is going to be different across different protocols. However, we can show that in Bitcoin and Ouroboros sleepy type proof of stake protocols, this lambda ag is upper bounded by lambda a. And in the Chia Proof-of-Space protocols, these lambda ags are upper bounded e times lambda a. And again, this E property comes because of independent mining processes or production processes on each existing block. Okay, so now we have represented every attack as a type of a race. And now let's come to the second part of our title, why Nakamoto always wins. So before that, let's first recall that the protocol is secure against private attacks if the growth rate of the fictitious honest chain, this lambda h over 1 plus lambda h delta, is larger than the growth rate of the adversary trees, which we denoted by lambda ag. So now let's show our fictitious honest chain and let's show our adversary trees. So now whenever the growth rate of the fictitious honest chain is larger than the growth rate of the adversarial trees, what is going to happen is that there will be a certain kinds of special blocks. We have not yet see these special blocks, but we'll see soon. Yes, here. So there will be special kinds of blocks that we like to call the Nakamoto blocks that will basically enter the fictitious honest chain or tree. By the way, this can be a fictitious honest tree because of forking, but I am basically showing these honest blocks as representatives for the specific levels. There will be certain types of honest blocks such that no adversary tree that is building on a previous honest block, that came before the Nakamoto block, will be able to replace the Nakamoto block. So as we can see, the honest blocks H1, H2, and H3, they can all be replaced by this yellow adversary tree. But so far, Nakamoto block has not been replaced, and I guarantee you that this block will never be replaced by this yellow, by none of the trees that were built on honest blocks before the Nakamoto block. So Nakamoto blocks will stabilize their prefix. So as we grow this longest chain further, there will be new honest blocks and there will be new adversary blocks that are growing. So as you can see, H6 and H7 was replaced by this purple adversary tree. Now the yellow adversary tree has grown to the same level, overtaking the Nakamoto block. However, we still cannot say it replaces the Nakamoto block because in the meanwhile, the fictitious honest chain has also grown. And so on. So now the result on the Nakamoto blocks is rather a statistical one because I cannot guarantee that any block is a Nakamoto block, because to actually say that this H4 is a Nakamoto block, I not only need to look at the past, but I also need to look at the infinite future, because when I look at the infinite future, maybe there will be a time at t equals 100 million where this yellow adversary tree has overtaken the Nakamoto block. Maybe there will be a time t equals a million where this yellow adversary tree has reached the tip of the fictitious honest chain, so it can basically replace the Nakamoto block. So now I can only guarantee that there will be certain blocks that are Nakamoto blocks with a certain frequency, but I cannot say for sure that a block is a Nakamoto block. Or rather, I can say given any sequence of these honest blocks from H0 to H8, there will be at least be one Nakamoto block with very high probability as I look at a larger and larger sequence, but I cannot pinpoint for sure with probability 1 that any of these blocks are Nakamoto blocks. However, this statistical result is actually enough for us to claim security, exactly because it tells us that the Nakamoto blocks exist and they keep arriving and they also stabilize their prefix. So as people who, if there are people who looked at some past research on security of these protocols, there have been concepts like pivots, etc. So these Nakamoto blocks almost act like these pivots. And they guarantee security against all types of attacks. So these are the main components of the method. It's basically partitioning this block mess or block tree of meshed adversary and honest blocks into a clean fictitious honest chain or tree and adversarial trees, and modeling every kind of attack as a race between these adversary trees and the fictitious honest chain. And once we modeled it as such, as long as these adversary trees grow at slower speeds than the honest chain, we can say that there will be certain types of blocks that stabilize their prefix, thus proving the security. By the way, the name fictitious in the fictitious honest chain or tree comes from the fact that there need not be arrows between these H0 or H1. They might not be their immediate ancestors. That is because of the way we arrange them. Okay, to put our method and results in context, let's look at some past methods and how ours basically improved on top of them, or how ours was inspired by them. So as I mentioned, the first groundbreaking work was this amazing work from 2015 that showed that the Nakamoto proof-of-work protocol was secure in the lockstep round-by-round model. And this method relied on a block counting analysis, basically counting the number of adversary blocks that need to match certain types of honest blocks that future works also called as loners. So this work was further extended in this 2017 work to use tighter security bounds for proof of work in a delta synchronous model in using convergence opportunities. And it was now the first work on the, not a POW, but the POS side was these works. And they have shown that the Ouroboros proof-of-stake protocol is secure. and they give very tight security results in the lockstep round by round model, at least for the first one. And then there was also another line of work on proof-of-stake protocols that use pivots by these people in the delta synchronous model. And now our protocol basically shows security by abstracting out the important properties of these POW, POS, and POS-space protocols. And it shows security for any types of these longest chain protocols, and it gives the tightest security bound for them, which ended up being the private attack threshold. Okay, so if you want to check out more on the paper, you can click on this link. And since I'm a bit early, I would like to talk about a very nice aspect of the method. And the method, our method uses the branching random walk. So where does the branching random walk comes in? So as I mentioned, there was independent mining processes on each blocks in the PO proof-of-space protocols, right? So now let's consider the fictitious honest chain at the top here. This is blocks HI and HI plus 1. Now, in the case of a proof-of-space protocols, because there's an independent mining process on each block, the growth rate of this adversary tree becomes lambda A times E. And the reason why it becomes lambda A times E is because this E number pops up from the analysis of a statistical object that has been analyzed before our work, which is called the branching random walk. And one of the main theorem in the branching random walk is the following. So at time t, let's say the first block in this tree was formed at time t0. At time t relative to that t0, the probability that the depth of the adversary tree is some number d greater than m is upper bounded by this quantity shown on the right. So very roughly, this quantity kind of implies that you should reach a level m at time t when you are growing with rate e times lambda a. So rather, m should basically be scaling roughly as e times lambda a times t in expectation, so that the quantity on the right-hand side is approximately a constant for the tip of the tree. So for people who want to learn more about this branching random walks, please check out the appendix of our paper. There is like some real nice math there. And yeah, I will just like pull this up for reference. And thank you very much. I'm happy to basically take any questions.
Thank you so much for the talk, Nusret. So yeah, are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, I'd like to ask, first of all, thanks very much for the nice talk. And first, I'd like to ask whether the assumption that the blocks come in a Poisson fashion is a strong one or a weak one, or like your comments on this assumption, and whether it can be lifted and whether we want it to be lifted.
Yes, that's a great question. So this assumption becomes a faithful assumption to reality when we think of, in general, in the analysis, what previous works have done is they have divided time into slots. And now a node basically produces a block or gains the right to produce a block and attach it to anywhere in the block tree when it basically wins the lottery in each slot. And there's a probability P for each block, each node to win the lottery and produce a block. Now this Poisson assumption becomes faithful to the reality if we think of these slots to be very small. So the probability that each node produces a block within a slot is actually small. And when the delta delay, that is the capital delta of the synchronous network, is very large as compared to these slots. Because the main parameters of analysis were the beta adversary fraction and lambda times delta, which is the number of blocks, expected number of blocks produced per delta time period. That would basically determine how much forking we have. And this Poisson assumption becomes more faithful if we think of each slot to be very small, almost like slot size going to 0, and then the delta being very large as compared to slots. Now, this is not necessarily true for every protocol. You can design the slots to match the delta. Actually, my colleague Srivatsan is going to perhaps give a talk in one of the future weeks here, so he might talk more about this, so that you can basically make your slot size to match this delta delay parameter, make your slot size to be as large as delta, and then it's no longer clear that whether you should model this thing as a Poisson process. So Poisson process is a nice process to analyze, so that kind of guided us, and also it becomes faithful if you make your slot size go to 0, and just want the analysis to be more continuous.
Thanks.
Maybe I can follow up with one question, and that relates to the work in the Bitcoin backbone paper. And you mentioned the common prefix property that you called safety here, but the backbone paper also analyzes two more chain properties, which are chain growth and chain quality. So how does your analysis relate to these particular properties and attacks against them?
Yes, so we basically show the chain quality indirectly. You know, in this method, there is, or in our analysis of this method at least, we didn't give like a chain quality number, a lower bound on it, a strict hard lower bound. But what we have shown is that given any like window of, let's say, time sigma, and you can think of, I guess, sigma as the security parameter, or it is a polynomial function of the security parameter. Given any period sigma, there will be a Nakamoto block within this period with probability that is, if I just go back to one of the previous slides here, with probability, except with probability e to the minus sigma, which is negligible. So once we have a Nakamoto block within this time period, what this means is that within this time period, there will be an honest block that will enter the longest chain and that will stay in the longest chain forever. So this kind of implies that there is a non-zero chain quality, because in every time window with very, very high probability, an honest block will become part of the longest chain. And we know that the longest chain doesn't grow at infinite speed because there is lambda, and statistically there is only so much blocks the adversary can mine. So this indirectly implies there is a positive chain quality. And the chain growth is also implied by, again, these Nakamoto blocks, because Nakamoto blocks basically advance the tip of the longest chain by one block, at least one block. So it also implies a lower bound on the chain growth. So these properties are satisfied, and but we didn't give numbers for them in this work. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Any further questions?
Well, if there are none, I would maybe just have a quick comment on the related work section, because I think there is one nice aspect of that overview that maybe shouldn't remain unnoticed, which is like this distinction of the works into these two approaches of the Nakamoto block, or earlier being called, as you said, pivot blocks, or these are related concepts, and that's like one avenue of analysis, and the other one being the one via margin or forkable strings, if you wish, that originates in POS, but also has an application here, and maybe to also to bring to attention that basically at the same CCS there was we had a paper that proves the same bounds, but only for POW and POS, so the two of the three bounds you mentioned. But
Yes,
as you said, the technique is the interesting part, and so the interesting aspect here is that that's exactly by the other avenue of approaching this problem. So that's via margin and forkable strings, whereas your works is via Nakamoto blocks. So maybe the interesting question is to somehow see the connection between these two approaches. I mean, any comment to this is welcome if you have.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, in the same thesis, there was actually a paper that gave the same results for POW and POS, and the method there was different, but the result, the tightness was the same. They also showed that basically this private attack threshold is the threshold for security or loss of security. And yeah, the main interesting parts is as you mentioned in the methods, and so our method is based on partitioning these block trees into distinct adversary and honest chains and analyzing the race between those. And there also in that paper, I think the method was coming from this forkable string analysis. Yes, and yeah. So another thing in our research was we also looked at the proof of space protocols, which required this different kind of analysis using these branching random walks to basically find the growth rate of the adversary trees because of this independent mining processes. Actually, preceding this work, there is a preprint in arXiv, and I'm trying to remember the name. It was by my advisor and one of our older students in the group. And so that work basically analyzed the regime between the point where you have a different randomness at each block and the point where you have the same randomness in each block. And these 2 points corresponded to the POS and the PO space graphs that I have shown. I've showed in the previous one of the previous slides. But you can basically think of some blocks having the same randomness and some blocks having the different randomness. In this case, the growth rate of these adversary trees will change between lambda A and E times lambda A. It will be basically like a point between these two numbers, depending on what fraction of the blocks have the same randomness. Yeah, that's a different part of our analysis, but yeah. So for people who are curious, please, you can, I think you can go to CCS, and both of the papers, both ours and the one that was mentioned, should be on the same session.
Thanks. So I guess my curious question was whether you see some relationships between these techniques, or whether you can comment on that.
Yeah, so I think there's, on a fundamental level, there is a relation between them. So I am like more familiar with the pivots that is listed here, and I think Nakamoto blocks are very similar to the pivots. At least in terms of analysis, they are very similar. For forkable strings, I think I need to think a little bit more to actually make a clever comment. But if you have any thing you want to say on
not really. I think I'm at the same stage. That's I would like to understand that. But okay.
But I think so. Yeah, thank you very much for the great comment. I think they, on a fundamental level, they are like all of these works or the proof methods are similar in the sense that you always try to find a metric for the growth of these honest tree chains, and you want to basically show that not every honest block can be replaced by some adversary tree or chain or like a forkable string of the consisting of adversary blocks. You want to show that it cannot be replaced by those. Not all of them can be replaced by those. And that is like the fundamental part of the security analysis, which is common in all of these works. For instance, in the backbone paper, there was a process of counting the honest blocks that are loners that are for sure guaranteed to extend the length of a honest longest chain by 1. And once you statistically show that, and there cannot be as many adversary blocks as loners, let's say, then you can show that there will be some honest blocks that are going to extend extend the longest chain for every honest node. B, they will stay within the longest chain for the honest nodes forever. So it would imply the security, just like in a Nakamoto block case.
Okay, any additional questions for Nusret? Okay, if not, then maybe we can wrap up a little bit earlier today. So thank you once again, Nusret, for taking the time today. It was wonderful to have you. And I hope you will join us in future seminars as well. And I invite everyone to attend our next couple meetings for April. I know there's no titles and abstracts yet, but I will try to upload them today. And you can look at the website for the topics of the upcoming talks. The one we will have next week will be, I think, the first one that is not 100% on blockchains. We will do something on NPC, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.